All right, Saagar, what's on your radar?
Well, 9 years ago, Mitt Romney was overwhelmingly defeated for the presidency, with a widely held feeling among the American electorate that he was out of touch and didn't care about them. More importantly, that he wouldn't do anything to ameliorate their tremendous suffering wrought by the Great Recession of 2008. Today, Mitt Romney just proposed, arguably, one of the most expansionary and important fiscal programs of the last decade. A stunning development which roils the battle for the future of the right, and it exposes some actually key fractures of everybody. So let me lay it all out for you. It can seem a bit complicated, but it's pretty simple. Instead of the absolute mess of programs that we have right now, which have failed at combating child poverty and boosting our fertility rate, Romney proposes the following: $350 a month to families with kids under 5, $250 a month for kids up to 17, with any family maxing out at $1,250 a month. So, even better, in my opinion, it would offer $1,400 to anybody who has a child on the way. It's offering key cash up front for expensive baby supplies, and the plan caps out at a single parent making $200K, families making more than $400. So the plan would almost single-handedly cut child poverty in the United States to the lowest level in decades. It would simplify our arcane and insane system right now, which right and left both hate. The left hates it because it excludes the lowest income parents who don't work, and the right hates it because it's a mess of administration, and it clearly is not working to boost America's burgeoning fertility crisis. That last part is bound to rankle some people. In fact, when I praised this publicly, I was hit with unsurprisingly skeptical takes around why do we even need more kids in the first place? Why should we pay people to have kids? Do we even want more kids? Doesn't this discriminate against people who don't have kids? The answer to the last question is yes. Frankly, I'm okay with that. That's probably why I've never been for a universal basic income, and instead have always favored policies like this. And it also answers a lot of questions that some of you level at me all the time. What exactly makes you conservative, Saagar? You're looking at it right here. So I don't think government policy or our culture should be centered around maximizing individual liberty and choice. I think it should be centered around making it easy as possible to fulfill the most basic task of a civilization, which is replacing itself and producing prosperity for the current and future generation. Nothing about our consumerist culture of today is maximizing these goals. It is the opposite of conservative, when your supposedly free trade and markets have created a culture where it's cheaper to eat crappy food, buy plastic stuff, and watch TV every day rather than have children and get married. As I've said repeatedly in recent days, people don't even want to watch TV all day or just buy stuff. They're simply responding to the incentives within the economic system. As journalist Matt Iglesias has shown repeatedly, surveys of Americans show that they want 2.5 kids on average, but in practice have far fewer, only 1.72 in 2018. That's a huge gap, and it requires for us to think a little bit. People want more kids but aren't having them. Well, clearly, it's too hard to have kids. What's the barrier to kids in our culture? It's money. It's cost of having a child. It's healthcare, all the externalities, having to leave your job, stuff like that. So the solution is simple. Make it more economically viable to have children. It's the simplest solution on the planet, which many people on the reformist right have actually identified now for nearly a decade. And yet somehow the guy whose defeat and terrible policy ideas in 2012, who sparked this movement, is the person who seems to have embraced it. Ironically, however, the plan itself is now being cut from the right and left in some extremely revealing ways which would hurt this policy's legacy and, worse, make it harder for people to have children. From the right, some unsuspecting characters actually came out against it. Senators Marco Rubio and Mike Lee issuing a statement opposing it. The reason this matters is that Rubio and Lee made quite a stir another lifetime ago when they originally proposed the child tax credit. It was seen as the emergence of a new right, quaint, actually in retrospect, given Trump's rise, but it was a big deal at the time nonetheless. So why are they against it now? They say that it would encourage government dependency and unemployment, which would conversely encourage a retreat from marriage and the labor force in poorer communities. It's not an unreasonable concern, but as Ross Douthat of the New York Times points out, it may be moot. Romney's plan only phases out at the highest income threshold, meaning that there isn't a quote-unquote work disincentive as there were in previous iterations of American welfare. And second is this. We don't really have time to quibble with these fights from 1996. We are literally in a massive fertility crisis, which is only going to get worse after the coronavirus depression, the social isolation, and the immense disruption to our lives that this has wrought. Demographics is destiny in only one way. When your population declines, your country gets worse. Take a look over at Russia for the worst exemplar of what your society looks like when things go terribly wrong for a prolonged period of time. As Ross writes, quote, "In this environment, it is worth risking some small incentive to have and raise kids in non-ideal circumstances in order to create a more welcoming society for child rearing overall. The conservative goals of supporting work and marriage remain important, but in the balance, they have to yield to a little more fundamental goal, that society should reproduce itself." Exactly right. And from the left, that's what's going on as well. Well, it's something that Crystal and I have observed for a long time. Somehow they have memed themselves into becoming deficit hawk Republicans. The Democratic plan would actually diminish the size of the benefit for Americans making more than $75,000 and couples who jointly earn $150,000. This has a whole host of problems. Number one, it's way harder to do through the IRS. Number two, by making it more targeted, you of course open yourself up to political attack in the future. And number three, as Matt Brunig actually told the Washington Post, many families whose circumstances change will end up getting lower monthly payments than they're eligible for, or they'll get a big tax bill at the end of the year by pegging this to income. It's a nightmare, and it's the opposite of certainty, and ironically, by phasing it in and out on income, the Democrats would actually make this become more politically vulnerable to attack than a Mitt Romney universal plan. Giving people money is popular. Giving people money for something that they want anyways and will immeasurably benefit our society is even more popular. If you accept that our situation is dire, then I would urge the passage of this Mitt Romney plan from the right, and I would pray that the Democrats will not be foolish enough to try and reduce this. So I actually think we should try and make this happen. And it's kind of amazing, Crystal, to watch it from the left. To watch the left, the Democrats, senior Democrats, proposing phasing this thing out by income. I'm like, are you guys fools? Do you want this to be cut by the next Republican president and targeted as welfare? And on the right, I don't even really know what to say, which is like, I get where you're coming from, I guess, but guess what, guys? You don't control the Senate, you don't control the House, and the president is a Democrat. So work in order to get the best of what you possibly can. And if you're actually serious about boosting kids, this is by far one of the most expansive and best programs we would have in modern American history. And it should be treated that way. If Biden passes it, I would support it 100%. I don't care if it's Democrat or Republican who does it.
Yeah, this is one of those interesting places where, the way I look at this, the way you look at this, the way that a Matt Brunig looks at this versus how a Mitt Romney is looking at this, the motives may be very different. So, for example, I don't really care about the fertility crisis. I do want people to be able to have families and have kids if they're able to. But what I do care about is child poverty, and what all the research shows is that the more you invest in kids in early life, the bigger the benefits are to them, to society at large. So right now, things are really tilted in the other direction, where we spend a lot of money on college scholarships. We spend a lot of money on the, higher education and on the upper end of the children's life versus very, very little from childcare, no universal pre-K. We spend and invest very little in our children when they are the youngest and when it's the most vital. Yeah. That's why I care so much. And that's not to say anything bad about college or higher education or anything. I'm just saying, if you're just purely looking at where the investment would be best spent, it's best spent in the early days and making sure that kids aren't living in poverty when they are very, very young. That's why I think this is so important. Now, one of the critiques here is that Romney's plan would eliminate TANF, which is the current welfare program. Bill Clinton basically ended welfare in the 90s. He famously said, we're ending welfare as we know it.
It's true.
And it's true. What he did is he significantly cut the benefits and devolved it to the states. So in a lot of states in the country, welfare basically already doesn't exist.
That's right.
It's a dramatically pared back and broken program that benefits in reality very, very little. And the way that welfare came under political attack, and this is part of what you were saying, is very instructive for how you get a program like this to survive and thrive in the long term. What was the problem with welfare? Same problem in some ways with the Affordable Care Act. It was seen as going to other people, those people, right? It was racialized, it was ghettoized, and it was made into something that was easy to attack from the right, and ultimately it gets destroyed and dismantled by Democrats in the form of Bill Clinton. The most popular programs we have are universal. They're Social Security. They're Medicare, right? These are things that everybody feels like they have a stake in. They can't possibly do this thing of pitting groups against each other to say, well, it's really these undeserving people who are getting the benefit, et cetera, et cetera. That's why they last and sustain and benefit people for the long term. So the closest you can get to having a program like this be truly universal, the more successful, the more popular it's going to be, and the more invulnerable ultimately to bad faith political attacks.
And look, $400K cap, that is 99% of American households, something like that. Maybe 98, you could check my math. But that's essentially almost every family in America. You can't gut that. When you take stuff like that and you actually put it into practice, also it would be administered by the Social Security Agency, which already has the infrastructure and all of this in order to do it. They are setting themselves up for failure. And actually, I saw it phrased this way, and I referenced this whenever we talked earlier in the show, which is that if you truly want to do FDR level stuff, this is actually what it looks like. Sure, it can come from Mitt Romney. Look, I was skeptical too. I did as much of my research as I possibly could.
Yeah.
It's actually a fantastic initiative, and this is the type of thing which can actually cement you in history. And people can go back and look and say, this was something that Joe Biden and the Democratic Party did for me. And look, let's think about it in terms of politics, which is that what cuts through all the partisan money? It's all the partisan BS, right? It's checks. It's very basic level stuff. I didn't have health care. Now I have health care. Not really something you can say with Obamacare. I didn't have $1,200. Now I have $1,200. I got to check with somebody's name on it. I didn't have this amount of money. Now I have this amount of money, and it helped me pay for X, Y, and Z. These are the types of things which people actually do notice, and it's always amazing that Republicans seem to know this whenever it came to like the 2017 tax bill.
Right.
They're like, you're going to have $150 more in your... I remember Paul Ryan. I was once in a meeting with Paul Ryan, and he was like, oh, you could go to Costco. And I was like, are you kidding me, man? Like, this is your selling point? It was such a joke, and I should have, laughed him in his face, and I regret not doing that. But
laugh at him, not to his face.
Yeah, I'll laugh at him now. In retrospect, this is something that they understand whenever it comes to something minuscule, but when it comes to something expansionary, would actually help society, they don't really seem to do anything about it. Now, I hope that this will actually come through, but it does seem that the Democratic plan now has momentum, and let it always be known that Mitt Romney had a better plan than the centrist Democrats right now.
Mitt Romney got to the left of Joe Biden on this issue, and that is embarrassing.
Yes.
Next on Rising, looks like Candace Owens mulling a run for president. Team Rising is going to talk about that when Rising returns.